Hello and welcome to Frank's School, 110th day of the 6-year first video. This is one of those instances where I'm going to start something, and as I say so often, aller Anfang ist schwer, as the Germans say. It's always hard to begin something. I don't know. I hope it's not too hard. Anyway, I'm going to call this Hydra in my head. Hydra in my head. There is such a tangle of nouns, of terms, nouns, in my head that I have felt a real need to try to sort them out. And why I call it Hydra is, if you know that story about Hercules had to do this, every time he'd chop off one of Hydra's heads, two more heads would pop up, or more. It seemed like endless. The more he worked at it, the more showed up. And I felt like that sort of lately. So, and this looks so scary, or I don't know, confusing in a way. So I'm going to start getting rid of stuff as soon as possible, because a lot of this is trying to deal with all these terms. Why do I think and act so differently? I think differently from just about everybody else I know, and accordingly I act differently. Why do I build the things I do? Why don't I earn more money? What do I do with the money I have? Why do I do that? I'm going to try to explain that, but I really detest memoirs. This is gonna, I shouldn't say detest, but I would hate to think that I'm going to offer a memoir of my life. And autobiographies, the only one I ever read that I thought was pretty cool was Ben Franklin's autobiography. I don't like them either, so I really do not intend to do that. I don't think that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to sort some ideas out. You know, I say Hydra in my head because I think of the song Georgia on my mind. You know, this Hydra is in my head, and it's showing up as all these nouns and stuff. A tangle of nouns. And why do I think so differently? Well, I'm going to, a lot of this I'm doing for myself to try to sort this all out. Now I'm going to kind of go in chronological order to try to see where are the sources of these ideas that I have. That's why I call this Hydra the Eldest. I'm really going to start with J.J. Camp, my grandfather, James Jones Camp. He's the guy who bought the farm. In about 1942, he bought the land where I have been living most of my life. He built the biggest of the, well, He built the principal buildings that still are on here, with one exception, which is his home place, which my mother had me tear down, bring down here, and put back up, because Grandpa Jim is what I always call him. We always call him Grandpa Jim. He was raised in Cherry Tree, Pennsylvania, but he was the only son, and eventually he decided to sell that farm. For reasons I don't completely understand. He moved to Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania, where I was born, and he had gone to Penn State. He studied agriculture there, and I actually have his notes from many of his classes. He seemed like he was a pretty good student, and he became a milk inspector in this area. And he settled then in Roaring Spring. All right, so he profoundly influenced me through my mother. And also directly, and absolutely directly, because I knew him very well. He's one of the, in a sense, at some point in my life, I almost made this commitment to pick up his work, to not let him down, to do what he could. And I'll say more about this, I think, in a little bit. But, you know, so where did he come up with the way he thought that then so influenced his one daughter? He had two daughters and a son. So influenced them. Well, you know, he, living back around, well, he died in 1963. He was born, I think, maybe in the 1890s. What was around him that would have affected him? Well, he probably was aware of the Romantics writers. They influenced a lot of people. So he was probably under some influence by their writing, the Romantics in general, and then Wordsworth, for example, and then Longfellow, an American romantic. I don't know. You know, I don't know to what extent he would have ever read them, but he was probably influenced by them. He himself came out of Presbyterian stock, northwestern Pennsylvania, and then I mean, you can carry it all the way back to Connecticut and England if you want. English, basically, were his ancestors, and maybe Scottish, English, really. And somewhere through that process, I think he was aware of the concept of a gentleman farmer. His family owned a farm in Cherry Tree, Pennsylvania, and they raised horses, racehorses. I think there was even a racetrack on their farm just for their own practicing and stuff. So they were rich in a sense, land rich anyway, and they were sort of like gentleman farmers. Grandpa Jim did the work. I mean, he farmed. He made hay and he worked and stuff like that. But it wasn't quite the same as what you might think of as a farmer. But being Presbyterian, he was a teetotaler. That is, he never drank alcohol. And when he moved to Roaring Spring, there was no Presbyterian church. About the closest he could come to was the Methodist church, which he supported but did not attend. I don't know much about his family. I start there because going further back, I really just don't know. It was his grandfather, I think, that built what we call the Cherry Tree House, which is that house where he was born, which I tore down, moved down here, and put back up. So, all right, there's that concept of a gentleman farmer, which was kind of explained to me then by my mother to try to explain him. He married a woman who was about 7 years older than him, his nurse when he got sick at State College, in college, I think. She was of German extraction. Minnie Martha Nancy Bottenhorn was her last name, Bottenhorn. And as near as I can tell, I think her family was fairly scholarly. She was a nurse, and I want to say they came out of the Pittsburgh area, but I don't actually know. And I did not know her very well at all. I think I met her just once as she was on her deathbed. She died of cancer when I was just tiny. So she did not influence me that I know of nearly to the extent that he did. He really did a lot. Again, he bought the farm where I am, but much more than that. All right, back to what might have affected him. Well, the Back to the Land movement was in existence during his life. He was probably aware of it. I doubt if he knew Ralph Borsodi. Ralph Borsodi is the sort of the original decentralist. I don't know if he would have ever heard of him. He might have read his work. There was a time where Ralph Borsodi was quite influential. He probably did know about him. But this Back to the Land, it was already so deep in him and then through to me. Like, I think he had this feeling when he sold the Cherry Tree farm that he had to have land. Well, the story goes that his son, Frank, for whom I'm named, sent word back from World War II that when he got home from the war, he wanted to have a farm to go to. And Frank probably was very much affected by this, probably, I don't know. But there was sort of this idea that you always wanted to own some land, and that so that continued down through there. So anyway, Back to the Land, and I'm going to certainly come back to that concept of Back to the Land because of a book by Donna Brown. He probably knew about it. There was a book, 10 Acres Enough, published in 1864. I suspect Grandpa Jim knew about that book. Of all the Back to the Land books, that is sort of the classic. It's still in print. He probably knew about that. I don't know how much fiction he would have read, but Thomas Hardy's praise sort of the country life, he might have known that. He certainly knew about Thoreau. Tolstoy, yeah, he probably would have known. He would have known about Tolstoy. He was the most famous novelist in the world, I think, for a while. The extent to which Tolstoy, though, was involved in land, I'm not too sure. And Thoreau, he could have known about Thoreau. Now these economists, he probably knew about them. George Owens and Henry George, and the concept of single tax. Now those economists have basically been forgotten, just virtually forgotten. But he probably knew of them. He bought the farm around 1942, I said, and Now, Fritz Haber, he probably knew, he must have known who he was. Now, this is an interesting man because he was born into a Jewish family. He was a chemist, German, and you could say that half of the present world's population is living because of him. That's like 4 billion people. And it's because, as a scientist, he developed a way to synthesize ammonia out of, the energy source is mostly natural gas, but out of the hydrogen in the air and the nitrogen in the air. He found a way to synthesize ammonia. Well, that made it made fertilizer possible as we know it, and that's why I gave that figure. But it also made explosives as we know them possible, which brought on World War I, World War II, or didn't exactly bring them on, but greatly influenced them. So this man, whether Grandpa Jim knew about him or not, was enormously influential during his lifetime. And you could even say that he killed my Uncle Frank. That's not really right to say, but my Uncle Frank was killed in World War II, shot down, a pilot over North Africa. And so although he had sent word home that he wanted to have land, he did never get to know that land because he was killed. I was named after him, and that's... I'll maybe deal with that later on, but it's one of the reasons that I was so profoundly influenced by this man. Grandpa Jim had 8 grandchildren, 7 girls and me. 3 to Helen, 4 girls and me to Barbara, and then Frank was killed. Finally, this guy doesn't really belong here. Grandpa Jim probably never even heard of him, but I do have him here because I remember at one point Grandpa Jim, to give some idea of where he was coming from, when he heard that I was such a good student, scholar, and that I was likely to get into all these Ivy League schools. So, you know, I was accepted at Dartmouth, at Harvard, at Yale, Oberlin. I don't know, my father wanted me to go to MIT. I probably could have gone there if I'd wanted to. Anyway, Grandpa Jim never knew that I was accepted at Harvard, but it would look like he would. But his comment that I remember to my mother, I think, about me was, watch out that he doesn't get so educated that he doesn't know anything. And there's that 2 cultures that makes me think about that. Somewhere in this is this idea that it's not enough to just be well educated. There's the difference in actually knowing how to do things. And you know, that quote applied to me. That he influenced me too. Well, that probably only just touches it. But I'm going to go on now with the story next time, pretty much with my mother as an enormous influencer in this tangle in my head. Well, I've got it started. Bye for now.